As Kiwi Rugby League fans lament New Zealand's dismal World Cup campaign, Pacific Rugby League is on the rise. Both Tonga and Fiji are through to the semi-finals of the tournament, while the only thing looming for the Kiwis is an independent review of just where it all went wrong. The rise of the Pacific nations at the tournament has come off the back of several lead players opting out of playing for New Zealand and Australia and going with their countries of heritage, prompting some to label them effectively traitors, although, by golly, those countries like Tonga and Fiji have had things very much stacked against them for a long, long time. Our sports editor Stephen Hewson sifts through the wreckage of the Kiwis tournament and the rise of the game in the Pacific.
And Fiji are into the semi-finals, a famous victory here. Extraordinary match and a tournament that started so promisingly for New Zealand has ended in disaster.
As Kiwi fans wondered where it all went wrong, Fiji fans celebrated. After a shock loss to Tonga in their final pool match, the Kiwis lost 4-2 to Fiji to be dumped out of the World Cup at the quarter-final stage at the weekend, their worst ever performance at the sports showpiece event. So where did it all go wrong? Ahead of the tournament, the star NRL forward Jason Taumalolo, born and raised in Auckland, opted out of the Kiwis, deciding to play for his country of heritage, Tonga. The Kiwis were also missing former captain Jesse Bromwich and fellow player Kevin Proctor, both banned by coach David Kidwell from the tournament after a drugs bust earlier in the year. How badly did they miss them though? On the face of it, hugely, and coach David Kidwell's future's now in limbo.
It's not a short-term fix. The Pacific nations, they've stepped up. Their community, they come out and support their teams. We've got to make sure that, we're performing on the field so we can fill those stadiums with Kiwi supporters. But you just look at some of those stadiums, the one in Hamilton, was covered in red. We've got to do our job on the field to make sure that the stadium's in black.
The Chief Executive of New Zealand Rugby League, Alex Hayton, maintains the Kiwis aren't broken, but concedes the code will suffer locally, even if it means the game's developing internationally.
If we want to have a competitive international game, which is what we're trying to do in growing rugby league, at some point you're going to have to wear some losses.
But former rugby league commentator and professional player Peter Ropati says it's obvious the problem's a lack of leadership.
There's something not right in the team. There's something that's terribly, terribly wrong. And when I listen to David Kidwell, and I feel for the guy, he's so out of his depth. He has absolutely no idea on how to deal with this.
Ropati says the Rugby League World Cup has changed.
The bulk of the players now are made up of professional footballers. Gone are the days where you might find half the squad are made up of guys that are playing out of Nuku'alofa or playing out of Apia. 99% of them are either involved in the NRL or Super League, so they're quality footballers.
The Fiji coach Petero Sivnasiva, who represented both Australia and Fiji, hopes this tournament's just the start of the rise of Pacific Rugby League.
Could be the start of something really big within rugby league. That we've seen the dominance of those Tier 1 nations for quite some time, but now and I think it all started on the back of players wanting to step away from representing Tier 1 nations to go back and honour their heritage. I think it sends a real powerful message.
Jason Taumalolo copped a backlash when he belatedly decided to play for Tonga rather than New Zealand at the tournament. But Damon Salesa, who's an associate professor of Pacific Studies at Auckland University, says the Pacific community's been moved by the decisions of many players to opt for their countries of heritage, giving up the opportunity in all likelihood of winning the World Cup and the chance of making more money.
Many of the people I'm around, and myself included, have been really moved by the decision, particularly the players who would have made the front line of both Australia and New Zealand. Their decision to play for their ancestral Pacific homeland has been really moving. They've put their connection to their homeland above the money they could have made and even perhaps their chance at winning a World Cup.
Damon Salesa says while many players who opt to play for Pacific countries may have been born in New Zealand, they feel more connected to their homeland.
If you actually walk the streets of a place like Otahu, it's probably the largest Tongan concentration in the world. It's very, very Tongan. And so there are parts of New Zealand that are just so profoundly Pacific that might be driving them. I also think that both of these players have kind of proven everything they need to prove. And there's no question that by choosing to go with Tonga, they made more of a difference to both the Tongan team and the Rugby League World Cup than if they'd chosen to go with New Zealand and Australia.
Under International Rugby League regulations, players nominate a Tier 1 side, like New Zealand or Australia, which they'll play for if selected. They can also nominate a Tier 2 team, like Tonga, on the assumption that if they miss out on being picked for the Kiwis or the Kangaroos, they'll play for that Tier 2 side. Damon Salesa now feels that rule may change.
Australia and New Zealand both sort of conceived of the Pacific nations, just as they do in rugby union. They conceive of them as a kind of B team for Australia and New Zealand. And then when you get called up to the A team, in their mind, the All Blacks or the Wallabies or the Kiwis or the Kangaroos, you shouldn't say no. And what we've seen is that people will say no, that there are other things they value. And I think, we're going to see more players perhaps contemplate this because of just how powerful this has turned out to be for tens of thousands of Tongans. And I suspect there's a bunch of Samoans players who, next time the Rugby League World Cup rolls around, if they haven't changed their eligibility rules, they might think about making similar decisions as well.
So while New Zealand League fans are lamenting the Kiwis' demise, many in the country are celebrating. Not the Kiwis being eliminated, but the rise of the Pacific, which will now see Fiji play Australia in Brisbane on Friday night in one World Cup semi-final, while the other will feature Tonga against England in Auckland on Saturday night. For Checkpoint, Stephen Hewson.